Recently, I made Samurai Armour. Well, almost all of Samurai Armour. I'm just missing the helmet, and today we're going to be making that. Here's my armour at the moment. Notice how there's a lack of helmet? Well, today we're fixing that. But how are we going to fix it? So, I'm going to get a metal kitchen bowl, flip it upside down, and put my head in it. But how are we going to turn a metal kitchen bowl into a samurai helmet? Well, we're going to get the brim of a cap, among other things, stick it to the helmet, and call it good. First thing I do is get a metal bowl and put it on top of my head. It's roughly the size of my head, but a little bit too big, and it's also got rubber on it. So we need to cut the helmet in half, rejoin it, and somehow get rid of the rubber. To start with though, we're going to cut it in half. I got out my grinder and started grinding it until I roughly got it in half. After detaching it, I thought, you know what, I gotta figure out how to get rid of this rubber. First I tried grinding it and it was not working, just creating a lot of dust and a lot of scratches on it. It really didn't work. So that's a problem for another time. We're going to focus on getting rid of the extra metal. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut off a little bit extra so then it suits my head more. After removing that, it was time to remove the lip of the bowl. It didn't take too long, it was actually a lot easier than I thought. I then placed the bowl on top of my head and I looked like an absolute idiot. I thought I'd look cooler, but no. So one problem with it, it's very oval shaped. So what we're going to do is cut this piece of metal and squeeze the helmet together in two spots to make it more circular. I had to have a total of 4 pieces of metal, so we cut 2 really long ones and then cut them in half, leaving us with 4. But before we could attach the metal, we need to scrape away all that rubber. So I grabbed out a paint scraper and went to work. This was the best way I found for removing the rubber. It was long, tedious, and took way too much effort, but eventually we got there. Next we drilled in holes in both the bowl and the pieces of metal, and it was time to attach it. Normally we'd use rope, but today we're going to be using rivets. Now I've actually never used a rivet gun before, so I was a bit confused how to do it at first, but eventually I got there. The hope is that the metal is going to squeeze it together, turning it more into a circle shape. And so I started to attach the second piece, and that's when I noticed a problem. It wasn't really squeezing it, it was more just bending the outer piece of metal. So to solve this problem, we're going to take the 2 back pieces and rivet them together before putting the border around it. The theory is if I rivet the back together, it will create more of a circle shape, but we had to drill new holes for it and then rivet it together. I still wanted to have the look of having the border around it, so we drilled new holes and riveted it to the side. After that, it was complete, and you could see it was more circular, still not perfect, but it was better than before. But there was a problem. A massive hole formed on the top of the helmet. Alright, now it's time to sort out that hole. Before that, I tried on the helmet. I'm still looking as dumb as before. Now, with the hole, I have to add a piece of metal on top to cover it up, but I couldn't fit it under my drill press, so I tried drilling it by hand, it didn't work. So I had to cut a new piece of wood to hold the helmet off the ground, or I guess off the table, so I could still drill it. And it worked. I got 6 holes and it was time to cut out a piece of metal. All I needed was a small rectangular piece that's going to sit on top of the helmet, and then I'm going to rivet that piece onto the helmet. I marked out all the holes I needed to drill, drilled them out, and then stuck them on top of my helmet. After riveting it, it looked pretty good. I needed to re-drill 2 of the holes, but I'll get to that later. I was very happy with the results, but there was a little hole at the back that we'll get to later. Now since we finished the basic shape of the helmet, it's time to add this. This is just the brim of the hat. Well, I guess brim of the helmet. We're going to take inspiration from a hat. To start with, I'm going to trace out the very front of the helmet on a piece of metal. The first time I traced it, didn't really work out, so we tried again and got a better result. I also had to draw on some ways for it to connect. That's what those little squares are. After cutting it out, I'll bend those up and rivet them onto the helmet. I started cutting it out. It was a very odd shape to cut. I had to make little cuts here and there until I eventually got the whole thing out. It was a long and tedious process, and I was terrified I was going to cut off those little squares by accident. After cutting it out, I realized I had to cut them off anyway because I couldn't bend them up without bending the entire piece of metal. So I redrew 4 squares where I could bend them and got back to cutting. After finishing the cutting, I gave it a quick clean with the file, and it was time to drill the holes. I had to drill 4 holes in it and then 4 holes into the helmet. After drilling all the holes, I realized one of them lines up perfectly with one of the rivets, so I'm going to have to re-drill that hole. After quickly re-drilling it, it was time to drill the helmet. And here is where we run into the biggest problem with the entire project. I can't push the drill down by hand, and also the helmet doesn't fit underneath the drill press, so we're going to have to rotate the drill press and try drilling it on the edge. After giving that a go, I realized the helmet couldn't reach because it's a circle and it can't go over the table, but it does go over the corner. But unfortunately the drill press doesn't. So I drilled new holes in the table and lined it up. And it was time to drill those holes. I started drilling away, and I noticed every time I drilled through it, a little bit of smoke would puff up. I don't know why. I think it's because the drill was like going really fast and maybe burnt the metal. If anybody knows the answer to this, please let me know. Anyway, next it is time to add on those little lips onto the top of the cap. To do this, all we have to do is trace out this strange looking shape and then cut it out. After cutting it out, we'll bend it and then attach it to the helmet. It was a pretty easy shape to cut out. After all, it was just a rectangle with one curved end, and it didn't take me too long. After cutting it out, I bent it, and then we had to cut one corner off each side so then it can sit on the helmet correctly. After cutting that up, I lined it up on the helmet. This is where it's going to be sitting, kind of like two rabbit ears. After lining that up, it was time to drill holes in it. Now, this is exactly why you need to wear PPE, because as I was drilling it, the piece slipped out of my hand and spun. If I wasn't wearing a glove, I probably would have cut my fingers. Anyway, back to the helmet. Anytime I had to drill any hole in this helmet, it was a nightmare. Just such a strange shape. I then riveted the pieces onto the helmet and we were done. This is how it looked, like two rabbit ears, and it was ready to move on to the next piece. And that's going to be the side pieces. Now, there are two ways you can do it, one curving out and one going straight down. We're going to try and go straight down because it's a little bit easier, and also because I don't have the skills to make it bend in that way. These are how many pieces we're going to have. We're going to have 6 pieces, but 2 of them are going to be longer than the rest because we're going to curve them. You'll see what I mean later. Now it's time for me to cut them out. It didn't take me too long to cut them all out as there wasn't that many pieces, but when it came to drilling holes, it took a long time because there was quite a lot of holes in some of the pieces. Not all the pieces had the same amount of holes, and you'll see why later, but it was definitely a tedious task cutting them all out. Now I know I just said I was wearing gloves before for PPE, so just ignore the fact I'm not wearing them right now. Okay, now it's time to bend the pieces. We want the pieces to bend from about halfway behind the helmet all the way to the front. To do this, we're going to try bending it around this metal thing that we used to bend the torso pieces, but it didn't work out as well. Since we already drilled the holes, when I went to bend it, it kind of just made fold marks and I didn't like the look of it. So we tried bending it around my water bowl instead and it looked way better. There were still fold marks, but it looked a lot better than before. Before we can move on to the next pieces to bend, we're going to bend these end pieces. The reason we're bending them outwards is just like the bunny ears. On some samurai helmets, there are these little pieces that flick out, and I like the look of those, so I'm going to try and recreate it. After finishing that, we bent the others, and it was time to drill holes in the helmet so we could connect these pieces. This was quite a hard task as the helmet didn't like sitting on the edge here, but eventually we got there. There was one last task we had to do before attaching all the pieces to the helmet, and that was deal with the hole. Although we already put a piece of metal on top, there was a little hole at the back we still had to deal with. To do that, we're going to drill a hole in the top and get a piece of metal, drill 2 holes in that and connect it on the top and back at the bottom. To connect it, I'm just going to rivet it together, and it turned out perfect. Unfortunately, originally I used the wrong size rivet and I went back and quickly fixed it. Anyway, now since that's done, we can move on to the next part, and this is how it looks, that little lip at the back protecting it from the hole. Before we connect it all together though, I will paint it. We're going to rub it down with our methylated spirits, getting rid of any pen mark and any other residue that may be on top of the metal when we bought it. We paint it down with the same black we used in the previous videos. Before painting the helmet, I drilled 2 more holes and you'll see why later. Anyway, now I'm wiping down the helmet with the methylated spirits, trying to remove any residue and any of the rubber I may have missed. Now, when it came to spraying the helmet, I was terrified that the paint wouldn't stick. The helmet was already such an issue with the rubber, I was afraid there may have been some form of coating over the top of it that wouldn't let the paint stick, but we had no troubles, and it was time to move on to the last part, and that was this weird U-shaped thing. It's on the top of most samurai helmets, so I thought I'd add my own. I didn't know where to start with this one, so I just started drawing lines. After drawing a few different ones, I came to the idea of this one. A circle and 2 triangles. It was a pretty easy shape to work with, it was easy to cut out. I drilled 1 hole in it, bent it a little bit and drilled a second hole into it. I got it ready for painting, and then this time, instead of painting it black, I'm painting it white so it'd stand out more. I then riveted it onto the helmet and painted over the tops of the rivets so you wouldn't be able to see them as much. After all the paint had dried, it was time to head back inside and glue on some soft foam so then the rivets aren't poking into my head. I just glued in a few pieces and left it to dry. After that finished off drying, it was time to tie it all together. And while I tie it all together, if you guys like this sort of content, please leave a like and subscribe. I'm trying to hit 500 subscribers by the end of the year. And after my last 2 videos, You guys showed all your support and it was amazing. Thank you a lot to everybody who watched it and everybody who subscribed. Anyway, back to the video. After I tied everything together, it was time to put it on. Now you may be wondering, there's one thing missing, and that's the mask. The mask is most definitely the hardest part to make, and thanks to an awesome friend of mine, he let me use his 3D printer. He was honestly a lifesaver and he printed out this mask for me. Look how amazing it is. He did it in 2 pieces. As you can see, there's the white teeth and the black mask, and my job was just to glue it together. Anyway, now it was time to try it on completely for the full time. Wait, for the first time. And honestly, after looking at everything all together, I think the mask really makes it. I'm so thankful that he made that mask for me because I had no idea what I was going to do. Now I'm sure you guys are asking yourself, how strong is this armor? Well, I accidentally made a few pieces I didn't end up using, so I might tie them together in a future video to see how much they can take. I'll test it against some swords and some sticks. Also, if you guys have any other video ideas, please leave them in the comments and I'll try and make them. They can be other things to make or they could be skills to learn. I intend on making a sword soon and we'll see how that turns out. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.